Good afternoon. Grace to you in the name of Jesus Christ, Prince of Peace, healer of our brokenness, and hope of the world. We bring to God our praise today. We were inspired by worship and blessed by hearing the Word of God this morning. The continuous presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives comforts and strengthens us. Indeed, the grace of Jesus Christ sustains us for such a time as this. Praises be to God for all of this. Welcome to this Facebook Live presentation. As either a lay or a clergy member of annual conference, one of your responsibilities is to vote on a budget that makes the best use of our shared resources for mission and ministry. Your presence demonstrates your faithfulness and commitment. I am grateful for that. I also want to thank you for your faithfulness in paying your ministry shares. I am pleased and so thankful. Your generosity in the midst of these trying times speak to your devotion to Jesus Christ and our shared commitment to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. As we look over the past several months, I think we can all agree that few could have predicted how deeply COVID-19 would affect all of us. At the same time, other factors are affecting how we as an annual conference can do ministry. Among the considerations affecting budgeting decisions is the rising cost of health insurance premiums. Our Board of Pension and Health Benefits has been covering shortfalls in payments for these benefits, but the amount of reserves available to continue that practice are shrinking. Property and casualty insurance rates increased significantly this year. Investment income has not made up for shortfalls in the receipts that we need to continue these important services. Our Conference Council on Finance and Administration has had very difficult decisions to make. They have worked diligently, faithfully, in working through the conference plan for funding ministry to be as fair and equitable as possible, as well as sustainable. You will see that many readjustments in the budget had to be made. You will hear more detail about these and other challenges this afternoon. I encourage you to listen carefully and raise any questions you may have. Please listen to all the information being presented so that you have the most current picture based on accurate information. We have important decisions to make, and with prayer and information, we can make faithful choices. And remember that we do not make difficult decisions alone, nor do we make them in isolation. The decisions that we make affect not only individuals, but local churches and their finances, and most importantly, the body of Christ and our mission and ministry together. Each person and each church can make a difference. Yet we can do so much more when we join our resources and our hopes for our future ministries. We are better together. Let's take on this task with confidence in God's abundance. As we begin this important discussion today, I want to take a moment to introduce and welcome the Reverend Victoria Ryback, Director of Connecting Ministries, who will serve as the coordinator of today's event. Victoria moved here and started her ministry with us the day Pennsylvania's stay-at-home order was declared. Because of the timing of Victoria's arrival and beginning date, she has not had an opportunity to personally visit the churches and meet with our people in person. However, she has begun her ministry dealing with our response to COVID-19, working with the Missional Board and the Committee on Inclusiveness to continue to develop our emphasis on mission and dismantling racism, as well as working with the other directors, learning and planning for our conference. Victoria is an ordained deacon and has been a leader throughout our connection, having worked at the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry, the Minnesota Annual Conference, and the United Methodist Publishing House. Welcome, Victoria. We are excited for our common journey as partners in ministry. Let me end with the words of God's promise in Jeremiah 29. For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. That when you call upon me and come and pray to me, I will hear you. When you search for me, you will find me if you seek me with all your heart. God still has plans for us. A future with hope lies ahead. God is hearing our prayers and will fulfill our heart's desire to please God. Even in this time of challenge and change, I'm confident that God still has ministry for us and to do and will provide for us. May the love of God, the peace of Christ, and the encouragement from the Holy Spirit guide you this afternoon and in the days ahead. May your faithfulness be a blessing to others, to our church, and even to the world. Amen.
Welcome. I'm Reverend Victoria Ryback, your new Director of Connecting Ministries. I'm grateful for Bishop Park for his introduction of me. And I'm grateful also to all of you for your patience with us getting online today. We did test the process of connecting to Facebook earlier this week and it worked well, but today Facebook just does not want to play nicely with us. So thank you for following us over to Zoom. We do encourage you to ask questions. To ask questions, you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You may have to move your cursor over the bottom of the screen for that to show. You will click on it and a question and answer box will show up for you. Also, you can raise questions in the chat function. You'll also find an icon for that on the bottom of the screen. And also you may need to move your cursor over the bottom of your screen to see it. And Stephanie is here to watch your questions and help receive them. And by the way, while we're offering our presentations, feel free to raise your questions. We will answer them at the end, but while they're on your mind, your questions, please do raise those. Mark.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Knecht, your conference treasurer and benefits officer. Great to be with you.
Now, as we said, many of you are seeing me for the first time today, and I do look forward to when I can see you all in person. I am grateful for the opportunity to work alongside you as we grow in love of God and neighbor in the Susquehanna Conference. You know that it's been a challenging year for our conference. Our churches have had to wrestle with the complications brought on by the COVID pandemic, the urgency of some social issues, and ongoing uncertainty about the future of the United Methodist Church. At the same time, growing costs of doing ministry and decreasing sources of funding for that ministry are requiring of all of us difficult choices. As we get ready for annual conference session in October, we want you to know some important information to help you make thoughtful decisions about how we will use our finances to support our many ministries. We all know the importance of shares of ministry. They help us to be able to share God's love through what we say and what we do much more effectively because we combine our resources. We thank you for being faithful stewards of your resources. Your commitment has made Susquehanna United Methodists among the most faithful givers across the United Methodist Connection this year. You can take pride in that. Your shares of ministry are making some great things possible. For example, the GROW, Living as Spiritually Transforming Leaders curriculum, which guides lay people as they grow in their spiritual lives and ministries, the many missions grants that we offer churches, continued development and camp and retreat ministry centers, guidance and assistance to churches that are just starting or reviving. Advocacy for the poor, the overlooked, and the oppressed. Disaster response ministry that has helped us minister in the time of COVID and will be helping us respond to the hurricane damage that has recently happened in our country. Also, oversight and services to help churches provide health insurance and pension for our clergy, and to maintain reliable accounting of our gifts and expenditures for ministry. And much more that help our churches grow strong and share God's love. We are better together. We cannot thank you enough for being so dedicated with your resources. And we know that there are many demands on your financial resources right now. Shares of ministry, insurance premiums, pastoral staff and compensation, pastoral and staff compensation, and your church's ministries all require funding. Today, we will talk about these commitments and the various sources of funding, both shares of ministry and others. We will hear some important information about equitable compensation, property and casualty, pension and health benefits, and also from our Council on Finance and Administration. Following these presentations, as I mentioned, we will address your questions. And again, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat section or the Q&A section throughout the presentations. We will address them after you have heard from all our presentations.
At the end of 2019, we began having some frank conversations with representatives from Cabinet, trustees, CFNA, Board of Pensions, and Equitable Compensation. We all had agreed to take an honest look at how we are funding ministry, the cost of ministering in a local church, and the annual conference. Ultimately, we wanted to see how we can be the best stewards of resources God has entrusted to us for forming disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Each year during our annual conference, we hear reports from each of these groups and vote on their recommendations. Today, we want to present you a little more of the bigger picture and how the pieces fit together. This will help us. This will help conference session members make informed decisions about recommendations for the budget. At annual conference session, you consider a recommended budget. Presently, this comes to $11.7 million. This budget is funded by your faithful remittance of shares of ministry. We use it to come alongside churches and their community ministries as we minister and provide in Pennsylvania, our nation, and the world. We are indeed better together. However, there's some significant costs to ministry that have not been covered by our shares of ministry budget, but by direct billing to the churches and conference reserves. These items include health insurance, property and casualty insurance premiums, and pension contributions. Therefore, while shares of ministry are important, they are just one source of the funding that keeps our annual conference running. That is why we are taking a look at the big picture of conference finances. We'll look at expected changes in expenses as well as various sources of funding for these expenses. Cost of certain services and benefits have been rising. These are putting an increasing demand on our conference funds, particularly those of shares of ministry remittances. However, many of our churches are not able to remit shares of ministry at a greater amount than what they currently do. Likewise, they cannot handle significantly higher costs of insurance and pension contributions. Thus, it is not likely that we can accommodate rising costs by increasing shares of ministry amounts. And resources from reserves, gifts, and bequests are being spent down. Balancing needs with receipts requires the conference urgent and difficult decisions now. Today, we will provide more detail about some of those challenges.
Thank you, Mark. Let's hear now from the Reverend John Overman, who will talk to us about equitable compensation and how that fits into the picture. John?
Thank you, Victoria, and good afternoon, everyone. The charge of the Equitable Compensation Commission is to not only make sure that all clergy are compensated with a fair and proper salary, but that such objectives are affordable for local churches, particularly small membership churches and charges. For many years, as far back as we can remember, the annual conference adjusted clergy minimum salaries at or slightly above the inflation rate. Typically, the norm has been 2 to 3% annually. At the same time, as many clergy know, surging healthcare costs have partially consumed take-home pay, as we have been contributing a portion of our salaries to cover that benefit. I think it is important to note that as an annual conference, our clergy salaries are very much in the middle of the denominational average. Roughly half of all clergy in the US average more income than we do, and half average less. Even in Pennsylvania, the Susquehanna Conference not only sits between the Eastern and Western conferences geographically, but in this category as well. Our clergy, on average, earn less than clergy in the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference, but more than those in Western Pennsylvania. That's about as equitable as it gets. In order to assist and share in the challenges on the road ahead, the Equitable Compensation Commission will, for the first time in recent memory, propose no minimum salary increase for pastors in 2021. Please note that these are and have always been minimums. We strongly encourage local churches to generously compensate their pastors, especially when their work and their dedication and effectiveness are merited. Last year, 2019, of our roughly 540 charges, around 16% paid at or within 1% of minimum salary. This includes those clergy who have been serving for over 12 or 15 years. On the other side, over the last 5 years, due to ever-increasing clergy costs, the annual conference has lost 46 full-time appointments, about a third of those in 2020 alone. Now, another important job of the Equitable Compensation Commission is to fund grants and sustentation for local churches that they need pulpit supply or salary assistance for a short time, usually 5 years or less. In nearly every single case, grants have been used to bring a local parish to the minimum salary that was required, with the aim of helping them reposition and strengthen their ministry for the future. Your shares of ministry largely fund these annual supplements. Now, we understand that news about not changing minimum salaries is difficult to hear. Many of you and your congregations will be affected, but making these changes now will better position the conference for the future. With resilience and in our strength, we will be better together.
Thank you, John. And again, for those of you listening, remember that you can start posting your questions in the chat or the Q&A. And I do see that we do have at least one question in the Q&A queue. We will answer as many as we can during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Now I invite Reverend Lou Parks to talk to us about property and casualty insurance. Lou?
Thank you, Victoria, and thank the rest of you for joining us this afternoon. The Susquehanna Conference has roughly 140,000 clergy and church members engaged in worship, formation, acts of ministry, and mission in the vicinity of about $2.5 billion worth of buildings and land. The purpose of the conference's property and insurance program is to assist and enable each local church and the conference in protecting and safeguarding their tools for ministry, persons first, property, assets. We do this by providing cost-effective and comprehensive insurance through a group plan. In the late 1970s, Bishop John Warman of the former Central Pennsylvania Conference created a task force to explore the possibility of creating a self-insurance program. The task force was created in response to 3 findings: the disparity of insurance coverage among our churches, the fact that many of our churches were underinsured or uninsured in some areas, and the complaints about the disproportionate impact of insurance premiums on the local church budget. The task force completed its work in June 10th, 1981, and the annual conference voted a program that came into effect November 17th, 1981. As the program approaches its 40th year of existence, it continues to deliver on this promise to protect and safeguard the tools for ministry. Most dramatically, that is, we, the annual conference constituent members, have replaced catastrophic losses, such as three Otterbein Duncannon, Hebron Millersburg, and Bethany Milton. More routinely, but just as important, we have addressed hundreds of property and liability claims through the years with a high level of satisfaction. In response to historical events, we've added new forms of coverage, such as sexual abuse or molestation, auto coverage, and cyber liability. Internally, we have worked toward fairness among the churches in premium allocation parity, extended coverage to additional congregations at the formation of the Susquehanna Conference, and sought current appraisals for all our properties. This is how it works. The Property and Casualty Committee, through its broker, bids the program, determines an insurance carrier, and settles on an annual master policy premium. The prorated premium is distributed among the churches toward the end of the calendar year. Churches are expected to pay their premiums in advance. The majority of our churches are current in their premiums, even in this half year of COVID. Most of the rest will catch up by the end of the year. All participants, whether they pay their premiums a year in advance, which 68 of our churches do, or are being several months in arrears, all of our churches remain fully covered. This program is an expression of our connection. That same connection is the vehicle for best practices in risk management, including education, inspection, and peer accountability. The nearly 40-year history of this conference's property and casualty self-insurance program has included more years of moderate loss than years of severe loss, more years of no or moderate premium increase than steep increase. Once, in 2018, we were able to give ourselves a rebate. As we go forward, the Property and Casualty Committee will seek to address the financial challenges now facing local churches, and we'll do that by maintaining a vigorous program of risk management, placing the program out regularly for competitive bid, and participating in discussions on appropriate coverage. Our confidence is this, that our congregations and their leaders will remain careful stewards of the properties, programs, and personnel in season and out of season, that the benefits of the connection are apparent to all of us, and that the success of this homegrown program will speak for itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Michelle Bowl, will you tell us about changes we might expect for pension and health benefits?
Yes, thanks, Victoria. If you recall that pie chart that Mark showed us at the beginning of our presentation, you'll note that the Board of Pensions and Health has pieces in each section. I want to start by talking about the overall pie from the perspective of pensions and health, where there are shortfalls, including items such as the DB, defined benefit portion of our pension contributions, active health insurance, and from line items and shares of ministry. Well, some people have asked why a holiday for pension and health insurance premiums has not been provided during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's because we've been providing a holiday by covering these shortfalls for many years. For example, the Board of Pensions contributed to health insurance and retirement shortfalls were $673,000 in 2019 and $741,000 in 2018. So keeping in mind that we're covering these different shortfalls, I want to talk specifically now about shares of ministry. Even when shares flatline, we still must factor in the shrinking number of churches within our annual conference. Therefore, pensions and health benefit costs are being borne by fewer churches, many with fewer members than before, and it's creating a growing burden on all the churches. Some areas from shares of ministry that are under our care absolutely must be covered. Things like CPP, the Clergy Protection Program, which covers items such as long-term disability for active clergy and death benefits for both our retirees and active clergy and their spouses. Others may take place every other year, so we don't have to budget for it every single year when we come before you, but it still must happen at a cost, such as a valuation report that is required every other year. And still other items, such as seminary health insurance, are budgeted for fewer people than we anticipate will apply, and the board simply covers the difference in cost instead of turning anyone away. The board has been working hard to cut costs wherever possible, such as moving our billing system in-house instead of outsourcing it to Pittsburgh. But it remains that retiree healthcare is one of our single largest costs that we share together through shares of ministry in the budget. So looking specifically at retiree healthcare, the board looked at models for how other annual conferences address this cost. Some set timeframes when the benefit will no longer cover new retirees. Others have decreasing rates of what they're willing to pay. Still, other annual conferences have trusts to cover some particular areas under the board's care, such as retiree healthcare, which Susquehanna Conference does not have. It was the sincere desire of the board to set up such a trust so that we could care for these costs well into the future. But with the resources available and the absence of a bequest that other annual conferences have at their disposal, we're not actually able to do that at this time without significantly increasing shares of ministry at a rate that simply is not feasible. Therefore, looking at the current options at hand, the board had some very difficult decisions to make. And one of the decisions that they reached was to decrease each retiree's healthcare stipend by 20% in 2021. This is for folks who are already receiving that benefit or will start receiving that benefit this year. We realized that that could result in hardship for some individuals, but it was the most judicious approach that allows for the benefit to still be significant for our current retirees and evenly distributed based off of years of service, all within our current scale. The board then met on August 25th, just a few days ago, and made another difficult decision regarding new retirees. We wanted to be fully transparent about that decision in our communication, including both the decision and the rationale to you before it's presented as part of our report to the 2021 session of annual conference. And so the decision is as follows. For the 2021 retiring class, only those retirees who are 65 years of age or Medicare eligible before July 1st, 2021 will be eligible to receive the conference retiree health benefit. The retiree spouse will then receive the conference retiree health benefit as he or she becomes eligible. For those retiring after July 1st, 2021 and their spouses, they will no longer receive a conference retiree health benefit. I want you to know that these decisions were not reached lightly. They were researched, they were discussed and prayed over for well over a year. Our hope was able to delay all of these decisions as long as possible, and then we reached the point where it was absolutely necessary. We equally wanted to preserve and prolong the benefit to our current retirees while also recognizing that the cost of retiree healthcare is placing an ever-growing burden on our local churches through shares of ministry in amounts that churches simply cannot withstand. These issues, coupled with the amount being pulled from our reserves to cover expenses, make our current practice unsustainable. We know that these are large changes and that you may have questions. Remember, you can start putting your questions in the Facebook Q&A and we'll address them at the end of our presentation. The board's deep desire is to be faithful to our retirees and faithful to our local churches. Know that these were difficult decisions. And I quote a board member who summed it up with all we were feeling when he said, "It is with a heavy heart." We don't take these decisions lightly, and both they reflect the year and a half of research before coming to you, but we also realize that shares of ministry cannot be maintained at our current rate.
Thank you, Michelle. I know that's difficult information, and we appreciate that you spelled it out so clearly. Now we'll hear from Tim Bayer, the chairperson of our Council on Finance and Administration. And after Tim's presentation, will respond to your questions. Tim?
Thank you, Victoria, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Timothy Bear, and I want to share with you that your Council on Finance Administration celebrates the incredible amount of good that occurs in Jesus' name because of your support of mission and ministry together as a conference. As your CFNA, we are grateful to have held the shares of ministry budget essentially level for the past several years. We're grateful to have the fresh eyes and wisdom of Mark Connect, our treasurer. We are grateful for the faithfulness in supporting shares of ministry, even during these trying times. Now, over the past few years, in conversation with conference boards and agencies, we have requested records of any reserve funds they administer as part of the budgeting process. We have requested them to prudently reduce costs, and they've listened. Even so, we have recognized that over the years, pressures relieved in one area, namely shares of ministry, have been pushed to others. We've heard a bit about that. Some of you may remember that health insurance was at one time part of our shares of ministry budget, but it was moved out of the shares of ministry budget some years ago. And when that happened, it was placed more directly on the local church and pastors, and those costs to both churches and pastors only have continued to rise. So keeping the shares of ministry budget level meant that there was no real relief from financial pressures at the local church. Property and casualty insurance continues to increase, an average of about 18% in 2020. So keeping the shares of ministry budget level still meant financial pressures increasing at the local church level. We have fewer and smaller churches to bear the burden of the total costs. In the last 10 years, we lost 15% of our membership. Now, that is 24,658 fewer persons who are members in our local churches. And in the same last 10 years, we've lost 24% of our attendance. That is 15,643 fewer persons who are in worship on a weekly basis. Keeping the shares of ministry budget level means that fewer people in fewer churches are bearing an increased portion of the cost. So this continued decline that I mentioned has put even greater pressure on our churches. This year alone, 2020, 154 of our churches experienced the maximum 15% increase in shares of ministry. We have cut budget requests and asked conference agencies to look to their reserves to fill in the gap, and they have. But the gap is still widening. Reserves are being depleted rapidly. The pace of spending is not sustainable. An example, in 2019, our Board of Pensions supplemented their shares of ministry budget by spending $673,000 from reserves. And during the same period of time, their investment income yielded just under $500,000. That was an excellent year for investing. In 2018, the Board of Pensions contribution to cover the shortfall was $741,000. This year, investment accounts are flat after a terrible start to the year, where we were previously concerned about spending those reserves too quickly. This year, a chunk of that money may not even be available depending on the market over the coming months. So significant changes, difficult and painful, are necessary. I want to encourage you to look at the proposed budget whenever it's available digitally in the pre-conference workbook. You will find some significant changes there and some significant reductions as well. Now, while there are significant pressure points in our finances, we have the collective wisdom to make the necessary changes to preserve our capacity to pursue Jesus' mission in our community and the world. Even in the midst of the financial challenges, we want to celebrate the life-changing ministries that happen because of your faithfulness. There is some remarkable good news and effectiveness displayed in our ministry together. Perhaps we don't talk about it enough, but let me give you one example. We fund conference camping at $115,000 through a couple of different line items. In a typical year, that is not nearly the actual cost to run and manage 4 large properties and all the programming that occurs there. The real cost is about $1.1 million, 10 times what we contribute. This program has been operating essentially in the black, not by unsustainably spending down reserves. Think of all the children, young people, adults that we invite to follow Jesus each year through our conference camps. And imagine how our investment of about approximately $115,000 is multiplied 10 times to expand that impact. Friends, we are grateful. Every United Methodist in the conference should feel good about participating and doing much more together than we would ever be able to do individually. We celebrate that. At the same time, we need to be realistic and prudent in a time of declining resources. We need to make wise decisions and strategically focus on what is most important in doing Jesus' work. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. All right, you all have heard a lot of information, and we share all of this so you will know some of the factors that inform how we all, as members of the annual conference, decide how to use the resources God gave us to share God's love. Just like for our church and our household budgets, we must consider essential and new expenses, expected income, interest earnings, and emerging opportunities in order to make good plans. We understand that you probably have questions for information and clarification. We'll take a look now at the comments in the comment section, and we'll address as many as possible.
I think 2 of those questions are from me, so I am happy to go ahead and start. The first question I want to address, I'm pulling them up now, friends, is the question about years of service along with age as a consideration of an option. So I want to explain a little bit more about how retiree healthcare works currently, and then I think that will get to that particular question. Friends, not every retiree gets this benefit. You must be retiring from a full-time appointment. You must have a certain number of years of service. And so it's already built into the system. The reason we're saying 65 as the cutoff for 2021 is because you can't receive the benefit before you're 65 because it's in the form of an HRA that's used to buy your Medicare supplement. And so that's also why that language was included about or Medicare eligible. Because if you can buy your supplement, fantastic. There were lots of things that we considered. That was one of the things we considered. Another thing we considered is what would it look like to eliminate spouses from the plan? What would it look like to reduce the benefit over a course of years? So if you're retiring this year, it's reduced by this amount. If you're retiring that year, it's reduced by this amount to the point where we get where we are. But ultimately, we felt that it was just more transparent and honest to approach it in this way, to say, we can't continue to sustain through shares of ministry how we do retiree healthcare. And we are not the only annual conference having that discussion by any stretch of the imagination. The other piece of that is that we know that we're not going to decrease shares of ministry right away doing it this particular way. We still want to offer a benefit and be faithful to those folk who are already receiving it, but we want folks to know in the future, this is the direction we're probably going. And that way folk can start to plan. The other question that I believe is for me is from Juniata. There is always an increased cost to health insurance. Now, remember that with HealthFlex Exchange, we all are picking different types of plans. There's 6 medical plans that are available. And then there are 3 tiers, single, single plus 1, and family. Each of those increase at a different rate based off of the shortfall of the plan and the utilization of the plan. And so that being said, there will be an increase, but thankfully it is a small increase. Each of clergy based off the plan they pick will have a different increase, but I think it averaged out just less than 2% for all the plans together. Now, does that mean you're going to say to me, come back and say, Michelle, but my plan went up more than 2%? Yeah, that's an average together. And so we have to be thinking about that. And so you've made a very good point.
I see that there's a question about when the annual conference workbook will be available, and I expect that to be ready in the middle of next month. And we will certainly announce that in the quick links that you get regularly in your email box. So make sure you're watching for those, and when they come, open them up and scan through them, because there's probably something in there that you'd like to know. But thank you for answering that question.
I think the next one is for me as well. So once again, I think there needs to be some clarification around our retiree healthcare benefit. So the way it works now is when you get your HRA, you must spend it through VIA benefits. And so what happens is you do a very long consultation, and based off of the consultation that you have with VIA, they help you pick which plan is best for you within their system. Now, here's the thing. Not all of our retired clergy actually pick to go to VIA. Some think that they can find a better deal elsewhere. And so in doing so, by choosing not to use VIA, they actually don't get their HRA in the first place. So we do already have some clergy that are seeking their Medicare supplement other places other than VIA benefits. But yes, if you are retiring after July 1st, 2021, you won't receive the HRA. You are still welcome to use VIA benefits because the Board of Pensions provides access to that. If you think that that's the best place for you to look, we'll make that work for you. But you are also welcome to shop for it elsewhere instead of being confined to VIA.
I see there's a question about conferences downsizing conference staff to help the local churches. Actually, if you look at the conference budget that's being proposed for 2021, there is elimination of half a position. So we are moving that direction, but before we move too far that direction, we want to be certain of the missional purpose of the conference and how the various resources, including people, are aligned to affect that. So I'm hopeful that there's a conversation among the leadership of the conference to kind of set that direction and then allow that to determine how we configure the need for resources, be they buildings or assets or persons, in order to meet that direction.
Somebody made a suggestion about the content of today's webinar, and that's a great idea. We'll post that on our website tomorrow. We'll announce where it is, where you can exactly find it through quick links, and we'll also post it on our Facebook page. Thank you for suggesting that.
Jay, I'm looking up more figures to give you an accurate idea. So I am going to come back to your question. I'm not skipping it. There was another question, however, that now went away. We need to bring it back, about what does it mean if you retire prior to 2021 if you are under 65. So it depends on your current situation. And so I would encourage you to reach out to Jason Mackey. He can answer that question more fully for you. It is our intent, if you have not yet retired, then no, you wouldn't be able to come back on when you're 65. If you have already retired and when you are 62, then we made a promise to you that you could come back on the plan, and we're going to honor that promise, but we want to be transparent about where we are moving forward. And Jay, like I said, I will get back to you.
Mark and Tim, that looks like there's a question about was there ever any consideration given to a capital fund campaign in the annual conference?
Yeah, I see that. I see that question. At this point, we have not had any consideration of a capital funds campaign targeting current needs. However, that could be a good consideration. We would need to put together a team to explore that and to go that direction. But thanks for the suggestion. We'll make sure we talk about that possibility. But to answer the question itself, there has not been to date.
And the reason for that, let me add on to that, Tim, is typically in a capital campaign, it's to do something specific, buy a building, buy whatever. And really what we'd be doing would be looking for an operating campaign, which doesn't have the same appeal from a donor perspective, given what you pay to your local church and then through shares of ministry back to the conference. So while capital campaigns are effective for buying buildings or something specific, they're a little bit more difficult and nebulous when we go out for a capital campaign to help fund the ongoing operations of the annual conference.
Michelle, I don't know if you've answered these questions that have just come in at the bottom about retirees having access to their HSA.
I have not. So I'll answer that now, Victoria. Thank you. HSA monies, by the way they're set up, they go with you wherever. So that means, yes, you can use your HSA monies post-retirement. You can use it to go into a nursing home. You can use it whatever you need to do within the limits of the HSA. Mark, do you have anything to add to that as someone who has worked with HSAs in the past?
No, I mean, I think it answers their question. I mean, the money is your money to spend for your lifetime on any allowable IRS health issue. And they're pretty vast, from everything from contact lenses, eyeglasses, to prescription drugs, to copays. It can be used for a lot of things from a medical definition that is yours for your lifetime in a health savings account.
So I want to answer TJ and Mike's question, which is sort of combined. Friends, the language of this is very, very clear. You must be 65 in order to get the benefit in 2021. And that is because we do have that concern, and Cabinet has that concern as well. And we're trying to figure out a way to be faithful to that. And so we're really looking at the clergy that are between the ages of almost 65 to 72 that could potentially retire because of this particular action. And so that being said, what we are encouraging is, if you are considering retiring because of the Board of Pensions announcement, or because it was just on your radar, please, please, please contact Jason Mackey. Because like I said, there are a lot of parameters that go into this specific benefit. And so I want you to be able to have a conversation with him about your particular situation. And then Becky, I see your question as well. So we have not done a survey, but we have had this discussion over and over and over again as a board. One of the concerns is, if you have folk go on to their spouse's insurance, and then your church chooses not to pay the blended rate, then we have a problem, and everyone's insurance costs just go up anyway. And so we're trying to figure out a way how we can be faithful to the appointment system, where if you are full-time, you pay this, and it isn't necessarily just for your benefit, right? All the monies come together to pay for that benefit. And so the board's still trying to work through that. Mark, do you have anything to add about that as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things I'd like to add, keep in mind, the blended rate of what we're charging your particular all the local churches doesn't cover the bill. So when we bill a local church $14,700 annually for the health insurance for the pastor, the Board of Pension is kicking in a difference because the actual cost in aggregate for insuring all of our pastors is more than 14.7 times the number of churches that have a full-time appointment. So I think that's really part of the conversation is in a connectional system. While it sounds like, oh, we can save some money this way, really we're not, because we're already spreading that cost and we're not spreading it as significantly as we should, if that makes sense.
Mark, I also think I answered this other question previously, but maybe my language didn't hit. So would you also be willing to answer Elaine's question?
I'm sorry, Michelle, you're gonna have to read me the question because
Oh, okay.
I'm not looking at Q&As. I can't see names.
That's my fault. Will this change encourage mass retirements for 2021?
So here's the reality. I mean, it could potentially have somebody who is going to be 65 and they thought they were going to be in ministry a couple more years. They may decide, you know what, for the lifetime of benefit, I may opt out in July of 2021 where I really was going to go till December of 2022. I mean, that's something that could potentially happen. We're actually looking at the data point for all the active full-time appointments that are going to be in place at July 31 or June 30 of 2021. So we're going to we have a snapshot of, okay, here's how many pastors we're talking about who are going to be 65 and could retire and get the benefit. And so we are scrubbing that data point at this point. The answer to the question, will people potentially retire who otherwise wouldn't have? The answer may be yes, but there's a lot of things that go into serving as a pastor. And so we don't want to diminish the reality that by just because this benefit would go away, you would leave the pastorate. And so as one other pastor who was on the fence, if I work in one additional year, I more than make up statistically on average the benefit over a lifetime. So there's a lot of things that go into that, and it's an individual decision. But like anything, you have to pick a point, and you could argue some negative consequences of a decision. But we were cognizant of that we could potentially be forcing every pastor who is 65 or old into retiring next year, even if they weren't planning on it.
I'm also going to tag team with Mark for this next question. And it says, in the light of the continued decline that Tim talked about, is there long-term plans for cutting health insurance for every full-time pastor? I will tell you, we have looked at a breadth and depth of different options for health insurance for full-time pastors, but we have never entertained cutting it. I'm honestly not even sure we could. And so that's the part where I'm going to tag team to Mark.
I think that based on what the conference has made a promise to our pastors, I don't foresee Board of Pension recommending at any time soon to eliminate health insurance for the pastors who serve in full-time appointments. But look, I don't have a crystal ball and can't predict the future, but I don't think that's something that's on the table currently for a whole host of reasons that I don't think it's helpful to get into at this point.
So I will also take the next two. So Mike, let me tell you, Mike, I did some figuring about how we could try to go back to not the system we had before where it was share by shares of ministry, but how we could distribute the health insurance cost. One, we're not convinced we would get a high remittance rate on that. For the same reason I answered with Becky, right? Is a church going to be willing to pay towards health insurance when it isn't going directly to their pastor? There would have to be a lot of education, and I'm not saying that's not possible, but do know that's something that the board has talked about. The other piece of it is it feasible? Like, is it with the rate that we'd have to charge to make up the difference, is that feasible, or is that just an additional burden on different size churches? And that's what we're sort of doing a study on now. And once again, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I also don't have a crystal ball, but I do want you to know that we have looked at and continue to look at so many different options to address, especially health insurance, since it is an ever increasing cost. And then the next one for me is, are there any retirees serving on the Board of Health and Pensions? Yes. So the Board of Health and Pensions by discipline must have equal number of clergy and laity. And then we're not told how to distribute that clergy, but something I am super proud of on our board is that half of our clergy are retirees. So half of our clergy are retirees and half of them aren't. And so it's great to be able to have everyone be in that conversation together. Would it be possible? We can't have that many people on the board. So the question was, would it be possible to have a representative who's a retiree from each district on the board? And if you do that, you need to find an equal number of laity, which is something that we're struggling with right now. But I think in doing that, you're going to go over the maximum number that would be able to have a conversation, or you wouldn't have any active clergy. And so I think that's something that would need to be thought through more currently. But like I said, I am really proud that half of our clergy currently are retirees and are not afraid of speaking up. And so they are a wonderful, wonderful part of our board. Many who have been there for quite some time and have a wealth of knowledge.
Question for me, why do we continue to let congregations go less than full-time, which lets them off the hook? That's a cabinet decision based on full-time appointments. It's not CFNA, it's not a conference decision, it's really a cabinet decision. So the cabinet makes that decision and we try to manage it the best we can. And so hopefully that answers the question there.
I see there's a question with regard to, should the reduction of conference staff be in the same proportion as the decrease in church membership? And let me try to take a stab at this. That a direct ratio reduction might seem like it would be workable. But right away, we run into some issues. For example, in the camping program, there is a director of camping and one person who works to register persons, does all the administrative work to make that function. So it's pretty difficult to eliminate those two or one of them. In equipping vital congregations, there is one director and a part-time assistant supporting that. Say in the finance department, we have a accounts receivable, accounts payable, a controller that processes a lot of that work, a benefits administrator who cares for pensions and health insurance issues, and a treasurer who oversees all of that. Now, in order to get a clean audit, we need to follow GAAP, General Accounting Principle rules, and so there's division of responsibilities that have to be maintained. So the question then becomes a difficult question about how to reduce staff and still maintain the legal responsibilities. So that's why earlier I mentioned that really conference leadership needs to look at visioning for the future and what the configurations are in order to support that vision, and then allow buildings, assets, persons to follow.
I will say too, I mean, we have made cuts inside of the conference staff that Tim didn't touch on, but I'll just bring up the communications department as an example. The communications used to have a communications director and assistant communications director. Now that department runs with just a communications director. We've eliminated the assistant communications director position. And so there have been reductions in staff personnel at the conference level. Even in the finance department, what we've done is we've hired a part-time controller rather than a full-time controller to save the conference some money. So while the persons while we still may have a position, we've done so in some part-time workers. We've done that in the communications department as well, where we have a complement of some part-time individuals. So while it looks like the conference staff number may not have decreased, it in a billable perspective, it has, because some of those full-time positions have gone part-time, or we have eliminated positions altogether.
I think that Ted put this in the chat, which is also super true for Board of Pensions, right? We used to outsource our billing, and now we can do it more economically in-house, but that requires having a benefit administrator who's doing a lot more than just that billing. And so everything, we can't just have to look at the staff, we have to look at the functions of that staff that we're also being paid for in other areas.
I wonder if there are any other clarifying comments that our panelists would like to offer now.
I don't want to give a clarifying statement, but I want to give a thank you. Friends, I will brag about Mark Connect any single day of the week. I'm so very thankful that he called us together to have this conversation, which I realize is really hard. It's hard for those of us that are presenting because we never really thought about it this way before. Like, we thought we were silos. And so for it all to come together under his leadership, I think is so very important. And so I know that this was an information dump today, but I just also want us to show great appreciation for us being called to have this conversation in the first place so that we can be better together into the future.
Thanks, Michelle. And my big takeaway for everybody who's on this call is when you get to annual conference virtually on October 3rd, and everybody talks about the budget and how much money we spend as a conference, don't talk about $11.7 million, even though that's what you're going to vote on, right? As a conference, in the last 2 years, we spent $32.6 million and $31.2 million, right? That's a whole lot different than $11.7 million. And I think this is a beginning of understanding the realities of what it costs to actually run this annual conference. And we all know that without the local church, this thing doesn't work. But I think it's helpful for us to think about it on a scale of $31 million, not $11.6 million. So thanks everybody for indulging us today.
Thank you for tuning in with us today and for raising some really good, important questions. As has been said, it's such an important topic and there's so many moving parts, and yet it does affect all of us, and we all want to do effective ministry. So we really want to make sure that we are giving you all the information you need, as we all, you included, grapple with some difficult financial challenges. Thank you again for tuning in, and we will post the script for this event on the website. And again, do contact any of us if you think of more questions in the meantime. Thank you very much.